Hi guys, Gnembon here and welcome to 37th episode of Fun Farms. Today we'll be looking at a surprisingly simple, easy to build, it'll take some time but it's quite straightforward to do it, and as you can see, very powerful Ghast tiers and Gunpowder farm. And it's a modern style Ghast farm, so running in a Soul Sand Valley and obeying the new potential spawning rules that were added with the 1.16 Nether update. Okay, let's be generous. I will even throw in a block by block tutorial, so you won't miss a thing. Isn't that a thrilling perspective? But before we do that, let's start with the usual walk through the mechanics, showing some abandoned designs and a short explanation why I have made this video and published this farm at the first place. So now we are looking at a project that I made right after Mojang implemented its potential field-based mob spawning nerf. I did abandon it, despite spending quite a lot of time on it, but there is a good reason why we are having a look at it. Ghasts are now a predominant spawn in Soul Sand Valleys rather than being just a super rare spawn like in the previous Nether, but their spawning conditions got quite more complex, as Mojang did restrict spawning of Soul Sand Valley and Warped Forest mobs around existing ones. I do have a whole video about it, where I showed you how you can use that to your advantage to create a perfect Nether fortress conditions without spawn-proofing any of the surrounding area. That video is still very much true in terms of the mechanics, however the thresholds have changed in final 1.16, allowing now for more mobs to spawn around at a time. Previously, 10 mobs in the spawning area was enough to disable all the spawning. Now, unfortunately, you need much more, but manageably more. So instead of experimenting like last time, let's just do the math, since it's actually quite simple and it explains fully the spawn limitations. Full disclaimer, this only applies as of now to Soul Sand Valleys and Warped Forest, and can also be applied to any biome via custom world generation through data packs. In general, each mob contributes some initial mass to the potential field around it, let's call it M, which then decays inversely with the distance, so with an M over X kind of function. And then whatever area has that spawn potential higher than some threshold T, no other mobs will be able to spawn in its vicinity. Since the potential decays with a simple 1 over X function with a threshold of T, the protected area for a single mob is a sphere of a radius of M over T. This complicates rather quickly when we add more mobs in various places, but in the most basic case where mobs are added in the same spot, it actually gives a really nice relation where n mobs simply extend that protected range to n times m divided by t, which if we require to fill the entire mob spawning sphere of diameter s, this gives a nice formula of number of required mobs to spawn-proof an area to s times t divided by m. And this is nice because the classic methods of spawn-proofing the area of radius s require a proportional s to the power of 3 of work, since we operate in a 3D and space. But with spawn potential, it's linear with s and very well defined as long as you know all of these constants. For us, S is typically 128 blocks, which defines a sphere where mobs can spawn around the player. But we might want to increase that slightly to allow for more flexible positioning of the player, not requiring them to be placed exactly with the mobs in the very center of the perimeter, but somewhere close by. Initially in the snapshots, T was set globally to 0.08 and M to 1.0, so 10.2 mobs were sufficient to achieve a full spawning protection. However, after some time in the final release, Mojang changed these values to T of 0.12 and M 1.0 for Endermen in the Warped Forest, giving 15.3 minimum Endermen needed to spawn-proof the area, and T of 0.15 and M of 0.7 in Soul Sand Valleys, requiring to have 27.5 mobs to pass the threshold. In practice, with a little looser herd and looser positioning of the player, you would want to aim to protect not 128 but let's say about 150 blocks, which would give 32 mobs required for full protection in a 150 block radius sphere. Still manageable numbers. To see that in practice, I prepared a few demonstrations. First is a simulation of any potential field of any of these three settings we had: Legacy, current Warped Forest, and Soul Sand Valley. Now, in the legacy settings, so old snapshots, we can see that one mob protects about 12 blocks radius of volume of blocks. Adding another blows it to 24 blocks, and so on. However, if we switch to the current Souls and Valley settings, let me spawn new mobs, that gives actually a little bit less than 5 blocks protection per mob. That's why we need more of them. Adding the force field in smaller increments of about 5 blocks, like so. And as you can see, the field expands in increments of less than 5 blocks at a time. And just get rid of them and spawn them in the corners. And as you can see, these same 4 mobs here fill up the area with them, but the same additive properties of the potential field make it so that we disperse the mob more across the larger area and just increases the protection to the larger area. It's a little bit off shape. So we actually need a little bit of less than what we calculated for the full spherical field. Now, this is all here simulated, just calculated in that grid. It's just made up so it looks cool. We can demonstrate a bunch of things just for the shizzle. So now let's go to another setup where values of the spawn potential are not simulated but read directly from the world, and see how we fare there. And we'll be able to observe it in a larger area. So you might have remembered this from the past when you used that to test the spawn potential for the first time. This time around is Souls and Valley all in here, and we have a small fenced area for the mobs and a player in the center. And thanks to the fact that we are not calculating that potential field ourselves and doing all fancy graphical visualization, we can actually observe on a much larger area and a much higher frequency. And again, we'll check how many striders we need to have to spawn protect an area of 128 block radius here. So just pop in a sphere, which is just a standard despawn sphere size, and let's maybe change also to 150, just to check a little bit more for safer values. One thing that I noticed before we start is that striders riding other striders don't actually seem to have any influence on the potential field. As we can see, in a single strider has as much field around them as naturally spawned jockey. But I will still suggest removing the top one if you get it, as less entities is better in general, and those don't help as well. What is good is that the striders that we breed also contribute to the potential field, so breeding enough striders in a pen should not be a problem. So let's spawn 10 striders, and as we can see, we are just here, just barely scratching the area, and those are values that used to be fine in the snapshots. What is important to note here that I use here cyan to denote the different thresholds for warp forests, which are now different than in Souls and Valleys. So for the warp forest, what's inside that cyan ring, it's actually spawn protected. By the Souls and Valleys, we need to actually go into the green zone to get the spawn protection. And that's what we will be aiming here for. So we have calculated that we will need 27.5 of a mob for a minimum perimeter. So let's generate 27 of them and see where we end up with. And as you can see, we have reached, in general, the spawning sphere boundaries with 27 mobs, but still, we need half a strider to get past that minimum requirement. Since we cannot add a half, let's spawn another one. As you can see, that puts us the entire area around the player as non-spawnable for the Souls and Valley mobs. And if we add another 4, which will bring it to 32, that actually covers the whole 150 radius sphere, allowing us to keep the striders at some distance from the player and still have the whole area protected. So 32 striders is what I recommend for now, in case you need to have them close enough. If you need them have a little further than that, you can go 36 or 40, you should be fine. Whoa, so let's go back to the topic. We got sidetracked a little. We wanted to show a good design for a Ghast farm, and so far we've shown how to prevent them from spawning altogether. Good for a fortress farm, but really bad idea for a Ghast farm. But it's an important knowledge because 20-something striders, if you happen to have a lot of lava lakes around your area, it's actually quite likely that naturally spawned striders would completely block all the spawns in your area, and you'll be chuffed, you'll be flustered. You'll be shaken but not stirred. Why the farm that you just built doesn't produce any ghasts? Blame the striders. So for more traditional Ghast farm, you would have a layer of hoppers with a layer of soul sand with occasional wither roses and some restrictions and light to allow for only Ghast to spawn. Soul Sand Valley spawns also skeletons and endermen, but they are not nether creatures, and Mojang just injected them into the new nether biomes without adjusting their spawning conditions in this fire-filled dimension. So that would be it. But there are two problems with this type of a farm. First is a tremendous lag that mostly hoppers here are causing, which you can elevate by replacing them with hopper minecarts, making this build a little more complex, much more expensive and prone to failing since minecarts are well known for their reliability. Oh yeah. I would still stick to hoppers honestly, since you would not build that farm in your base anyways and only AFK at it if you need tiers on gunpowder, so who cares? But the second problem is the spawning potential limitations. You see, if several ghasts spawn in this area, that raises the spawn potential and prevents other mobs from spawning until these ghasts are gone. This renders most of the spawning blocks useless for spawning new ghasts. The farm size is already way too large for my computer, should build it half of its size. So we are currently making about 15,000 drops in game, but due to this lag in real life we are just dropping to about 6,000 or 7,000 drops per hour, with the number of ghasts at the same time in the teens. Which actually, when I tested this farm back in 1.16 snapshots, with the old potential limits, that was even far less than that. A few ghasts at a time, only 3,000 to 4,000 drops per hour. So what could limit spawning is either lack of spawning spaces, which is clearly is not in this case, or spawn potential limitations. How this can be fixed? By dividing this concept into smaller paths and separating them spatially so spawns in one path don't affect the spawns in other paths. So that's what I initially came up with. Simply put a farm with spawning sections separated as much as possible, so organized in this dodecahedral lattice, which gives more than 90 blocks of separation between pods, yet allowing to have 15 pods in the range of the player. So even with very strict spawning rules, should allow each spawning pod to act pretty much independently from each other. And before you start screaming that this setup sucks because it's only spawning half of the previous of real time, I need to remind you about two things. First, in early snapshots due to higher restrictions of spawning, the full-size flat farm sucked even more, getting pretty much as this one, limited drastically by the spawn potential limits. Nowadays it's not that bad. Even in that case, we don't need to separate the parts of the spawning areas by whole 90 blocks like in here. Bringing them closer to like 20-30 blocks apart and organizing spawning paths into sort of a hexagonal close packing lattice should be sufficient with respect to the spawn conditions. But the main thing is that this setup here, while still using simple hopper based design, consumes only a tenth of what that dense farm was using. So hopper efficiency is much better. So I'll be frank, at that moment I just realized that there's simply no point in engineering a nether only ghast farm. Obviously you can have just a tiny one just to get a few ghast tiers if you just want to be practical about it and don't plan to use it as a good gunpowder source. But if you take a challenge of designing a powerful yet reliable ghast farm, the benefits of having an interdimensional design is so much better. First, we can limit spawns to ghasts only just by the means of using portals themselves. Simply the light of the portals will only allow ghasts to spawn. The portals will also immediately remove ghasts into the overworld that simply annihilates the issues with spawn mob caps and spawn potential at the same time. As well, that would greatly trivialize and centralize the item collection to one spot in the overworld, and simplicity of the nether portion of this farm would just be amazing. It's portals. That's pretty much all of it. There are some drawbacks of using portals in farms. If you play with other people and there's even a single person in the overworld, you'll get zilch, since ghasts will be despawning the moment they land in the overworld. It's just how it works with the mobs, but in that case it's likely you have a friend or a second account, because it's a multiplayer server, you can use to log in into the overworld as well, close to this portal, to prevent ghasts from immediately despawning, thus making this farm operational even on a large server. And the other drawback is that you will not be able to have any other portals 256 blocks away from the ghast collector in the overworld. So you will not be building it with some other contraption somewhere else, you will be building it as a separate farm. But in case these are not big issues for you or just playing single player, I think that's by far the best option. So the main problem I had with portal-based farms is something that I said in the gold farm video. So is it still a proper mob farm design? I don't think so. This is just a bunch of portals spewing out the mobs on the other end. But alas, it works, so I guess it's still a mob farm. Is this an exploit or an oversight? I would say yes. Will it ever get patched? Maybe. I would just stick to the proven and documented mechanics, even if they feel a little bit cheap as well. Yeah, so despite building it, verifying it works just fine, I put the whole project in the drawer and scrapped it like several other things, but then I got a message from Zizuma asking if I have any recommendation for a Ghast farm, and so I sent him this one mentioning it's quite a boring design, nothing creative about it, but that's a good value in terms of the complexity to the target output, even on a busy server. Boy, was I wrong. Was that a funny process? Funny process to observe. Portal-based farms are simple, but if you are stretching them to the limits of portal linking, funny things can happen. So let's finally start with our block-by-block tutorial and explanation for a portal-based Ghast farm. To start, we need to select a remote location with a soul sand valley biome. The size of the area doesn't matter, the layout neither, since we'll be building the farm above the ceiling of the Nether anyways. Just anywhere that is far away in the overworld from anything that you've ever built. However, if you want to maximize this concept and fill the maximal player mob spawning sphere with ghast spawning portals, which you can do, you madman, you need to find a sizable soul sand valley area, and you would need to remove the Nether content from underneath the bedrock as well. But any sane person would just restrict themselves to building above the Nether ceiling only. Also, I'll be showing you how to build a single module of this farm with a single portal in the overworld, but if you are adventurous, you can build more of these next to each other, just each one of them would need to have its own overworld collection point. These farms don't have any restrictions like the other mob farms do, so you can just scale it up as much as you want. As long as you have enough obsidian and portal blocks, you can do whatever you want. Before we start building the farm and the spawning area, we just have to prepare the ghast catcher on the other side. Otherwise, we're gonna get into big troubles, because there is no way for us to deactivate the farm, so it's better get ready. Actually, you can with striders, but let's talk about that a little later. So let's assume that it will be roughly the center of the Nether portion of this farm. So if you go through, that would be our overworld portal. The Y value of the portal doesn't matter, whatever is most convenient for you. Where we place the portal in terms of the X and Z coordinates is actually quite important, because by default each portal can capture mobs from the 32 by 32 block area in the Nether, but with a clever portal placement we can add one more block to the size of the farm for free, making it 33 by 33. The thing is, each 8 by 8 area from the overworld corresponds to one block in the Nether, and if you put a portal in the corner of this area or in the side, this will allow to grab mobs that spawn in a 32 by 32 block area, not much more than that. But if you move the portal to the very center of this 8 by 8 area, which is even, but as long as you put it in that central point, you can extend that reach through rounding of calculating the distances of mobs when they spawn to 33 blocks across. Now it is due to rounding, so you may need to fiddle a little bit with your portal placement to get a full 33 by 33 area. I'll show you how to do it when you get to the other side. But if you don't care, or you just want to stack up these spawning areas next to each other for several overworld collection points, sticking to 32 by 32 might just be a simpler solution. The good thing is that to contain the ghast, you don't have to do much. Just leave them 2 block gap and add some blocks to restrict their movement. Ghasts are 4x4x4 cubes, and they will be crammed here at the portal, so after going through they'll be pushed into one of those corners by other ghasts, and since part of them will still be stuck in that obsidian from the portal frame, they'll keep getting suffocation damage and just die. And then they'll drop their items in the center of the body, so at the edge of the portal, meaning that the items will be spewing out away from this enclosure and not into the portal. So we actually don't need any blocks here at the bottom, just a few blocks up top to hold them up for safety, and And now just suggest filling the walls with blocks, so in case you end up around this area they won't notice you and start shooting. To this point, items just gonna drip at the bottom of the portal, so you just want to fashion some sort of a catchment area for all the items and just direct them into some hoppers. Note that to keep up with the item rate, you need to direct them into at least 2 separate hoppers and not direct them into one hopper pipe, since you will be simply losing items. In case you want to direct items to some hopper sorters, you need at least 2 lines for gunpowder and 1 line for ghast tears. This farm mold we are building here today produces over 14,000 items per hour, including 9,500 gunpowder and 4,700 ghast tears per hour, and can be easily scaled up by just adding more modules. As I mentioned, you would likely want to enclose this area fully to prevent ghast from spotting you if you are in the area, but that doesn't mean that you can't strip the shell with some clever mechanism allowing to release the ghast. Imagine pranking somebody by building a tiny version of this farm on the nether side of someone's base just to spawn a few ghast in their base while they are here. Obviously remember to prank responsibly. So, with the catchment area secured, it's time to start building the nether portion of this farm. This portal here matches roughly the position of the overworld one, and we could try to get and measure the actual range in the nether where the portals link, but that would be quite tricky to do. I'll show you a better method, and it's super simple. What you want to do is you want to go into creative, but you can even do that on a copy of the world, or even on a test world, or even doesn't need to be the same seed. Any world is fine, assuming that the portal positions, numbers, in terms of numbers, are exactly the same. It's up to you. But what you want to do is to move about 16 blocks away from the portal to the potential corner where your farm would be, and place a portal. Just full portal or a portal block, doesn't matter, and figure out which positions cause ghast to spawn to move them out into the overworld and which don't. Assuming there is no other portals in the other side, now only players can create new portals. So if the overworld portal is out of range, the ghast will just stay and fly away. And the position when you place the portal doesn't matter at all, it's the position of the ghast itself that matters. And as long as it touches any portal blocks with its circumference, you should be good. When spawning a ghast from a spawn egg, place them in the center of the block, which is exactly what happens when the ghast naturally spawns, so that's fine, but they also spawn in different tick phase, meaning that if the ghast spawns with an active flyaway task, it may actually miss the portal tick and just get out of here, but thankfully it only happens with a player triggered spawning. So if you find that a given spot does move ghast to the overworld most of the time, you can just assume it's fine and they will be always moved away if they spawn naturally here. You want to essentially mark the corner where the ghast are still moved away, and this way you can mark your maximum size spawning path of your farm. And if you have cleverly positioned that portal in the overworld in the center of that 8x8 linking area, you will actually realize that you have a 33x33 spawning path. One thing that ghast can't do is spawn colliding with any collidable block. Portals are fine, but portal frames, which are made out of obsidian, is a no-go, meaning that each pillar actually forms a 5x5 area around it where ghast cannot spawn. The good part is that these collisions apply to portals as well, meaning that we don't need to have portals next to each other, and we can just space them 5 blocks apart. This layout is also sufficient to prevent skeletons and endermen from spawning due to light levels emitted of the portals, meaning that the bulk of the farm would consist only of portal frames and extra spawning blocks. And that's it. So going back to our spawning area, you would want to extend the portals to stick out 3 blocks to the outside, allowing ghast to spawn on the edges, and that would apply to both ends the same way, which means that you need to place a division somewhere in the middle, because portals just cannot be that large. The glass blocks that I placed here are just the reminiscence of the pre-1.16.4 portal linking rules, which were based on chunk distance, not exactly the block distance, and you were able to actually link quite a bit more to a single portal back then comparing to today. And that's something to be cautious about, especially if you are building it pre 1.16.4, hoping to get it working fine in the future. But anyways, one of the things I noticed in your comments to my previous farm designs that you really want to have a block by block tutorials for all the farms and contraptions, which I think is not really necessary, but if you want to, let it be. Hype in chat, because we have quite a ways to go. I might even need to break it down into some sort of a series, I guess. Really? Do you really need a block by block tutorials to bore you to death? I don't think so. But let's do it this time. Let's place all the blocks on camera. But to speed it up, let's grab the builder's wand and get it down a little faster. That's what I'm talking. And that would be your one floor of the farm. Portals are one block higher than the minimum to accommodate for ghast heights, and the next floor will start exactly at this Y level, sharing the bottom of the portal with the previous level. So at this point the farm is operational. If you want to just fill someone else's base with a few ghast, I guess that would be sufficient, but first we need to carpet the tops of the portals, otherwise ghast will spawn here and mess up primarily the potential, and we can continue. Now, one note about building of this farm. The farm is technically active, ghast can spawn, and players can only prevent spawning with their presence within 24 blocks away from them, meaning we could always have ghast spawning as we build it, which is not that much dangerous if you have an elytra, but could be quite annoying, with ghast shooting through the portals and breaking them potentially. Also, if you will not be lighting up the portals as you go, you might have also other stuff spawning, like skeletons and endermen. There are two ways to deal with it. First is to keep a flock of striders next to you, 30 or so, making so that the spawn potential here is high enough so nothing else can spawn. Or the other way, if you don't have access to striders, by building this farm quadrant by quadrant, chunk by chunk, therefore staying always within 24 blocks from what you are building, because once the section is completed and portaled up, the ghast will be spawning but no longer will harm you. They'll be automatically transported to the overworld and killed there. A couple notes with building of this farm. If you need to leave this area, you can use portals in the farm to get to the overworld, but that would be quite risky. First of all, if you go properly, you should end up in the collection area with the ghast. Or if you don't have a ghast, that's not a big deal. You will escape, but the worst is that we have stretched the connectivity of the overworld portal here, and we have to extend the portals for ghast to accommodate for their extra size. However, players can still use the sides of the portals to link up, which would actually generate a new portal and potentially link up half of your farm portals with that new unsecured portal that you have just created. And that can lead to bad things in the future, so make sure that nobody's using the size of the portals here to go to the overworld. The safest way to link up right now is to go at least 16 blocks, so give it 20 or 24 away from the farm area, create a new portal and just move around this way. This will make sure that no ghast can show up in some random portals and that you can use this portal for players going back and forth from now on. In general, hold the area of 256 blocks out in any direction from the center overworld portal should be devoid from any portal blocks. In case you build a larger farm, you want to set up these collection portals in a 256 by 256 large grid for exactly the same reason. to always have a ghast to be able to go into some portal that you have trapped. So going through on the other end typically puts us in the middle of the farm, and going this way without any ghast in the overworld is generally safe. Another thing to note is that these blocks over here, which is up to 2 blocks away from the portal pillars, are non-spawnable because these positions are still obstructed by the pillars. So you could technically skip them while building, just don't place those blocks, but it's only a few blocks and they don't harm anybody, so I would just keep them for simplicity. And since all this area is blocked anyways, you can actually use this area here to place things like maybe a ladder or a scaffolding that goes through all the floors for practical reasons. Those will have no effects on the spawning. So you could have stopped at this point, but man, that would only give you a handful of ghast tears and gunpowder. But this farm is an excellent source of gunpowder that is an important resource. Given how simple this farm gets to build, once you have secured the obsidian source and sussed out the collection and the portal layout, it's actually really worth to max it out. So let's do that. And that's it, we have built it, block by a block. I applied here a pack spawning skirt of 10 blocks to extend pack spawning capacity of the farm. I'm getting questions how important it is to provide it, and it depends on the farm, mainly on the projected area of the spawning spaces on the flat ground and the pack spawning parameters. But in this case, the farm without the skirt is actually easy to measure. Just plain portals and spawning spaces yields above 11,000 items per hour, and with that 10 block skirt is over 14,000 items per hour. So significant increase with absolutely minimum effort to do. And do they have to be glass blocks? No, they don't. You can put whatever block you want as long as it doesn't create new spawning spaces and mess up your spawning cycle. So glass is fine, bottom slabs are fine, string is fine, you can do whatever you want. So funnily, ghast normally don't spawn in packs. In the old Nether and other places they still spawn as a single mob, but that's actually not the case in Soul Sand Valleys, where they'll still have 4 attempts in a pack, even though only one of them could ever succeed due to spawn potential limitations that the first one would incur. So grabbing the spawn attempts from outside is actually very important in here. Now I would like to show you a special trick I discovered while designing this farm that allowed to duplicate portal blocks. I know, crazy. I'm typically against duplicates, but in that case portal blocks are really hard to find, and it's really worth it. And that's a big one because it allows you to regenerate portal blocks again and again instead of placing them one by one, which is a little pain in the butt and super hard to collect them from broken portals. So what you can do is, if you actually have an empty obsidian frame like that and you have a flint and steel, we can, ta-da, generate portal blocks out of nothing. I'm pretty sure one can come up with an infinitely AFK-able contraption to get these blocks, probably with holding some hoe in the main hand and flint and steel in the offhand, providing the infinite portals. Mind blown. It might get patched at some point. I see no reason for Mojang to keep this tube bugs, probably some development feature that they left in just to quickly fashion a portal if they want to go somewhere, but they should provide us with better ways of getting portal blocks, because harvesting portal blocks from naturally spawned broken portals is simply not sustainable. We need more sustainable resources in this game for sure, especially now when portal-based farms is a valid solution for a lot of farms because they're not as laggy anymore. The player AFK spot is 24 blocks away from the closest spawning space in the farm, and keeping in mind that we cannot get more than 128 blocks away from the bottom spawning spaces, this means that we'll likely catch some of the nether area inside of the spawning sphere, which you should take care of in terms of mob spawning. So slab it up or do whatever you want, but with a single module, or actually up to 4 modules, it shouldn't be an issue. It's typically devoid of spawning spaces anyways. There are 2 more things that you need to do to make sure that your farm is fully operational. You remember the lengthy note about spawning potential and striders I made at the beginning? Well, if there's more than 30 striders in the lava lakes below the farm, even if they're outside of the player's spawning area, they still contribute to the potential and can cause potential levels to rise above the threshold, completely preventing any mobs from spawning in your farm. What you need to do is to hop down to the nether area, look for wild striders in the loaded area and remove them to keep the background potential levels low. The thing is, while all hostile mobs are required to spawn only within 128 block sphere around the player, striders that belong to passive mobs can actually spawn below the player, even outside of that sphere. So, especially with more players on the server, it is possible that striders will actually respawn, and the way to prevent that is to fill up the mob cap, or a few, in case you play with other players, with other passive mobs. So you don't have to drag cows in here, and you don't have to hang them off the fence post. I made it this way here for all the peeps that go straight to the world download, not even trying to watch the video. And for you, honestly, you can just fashion a simple fence chicken pen and just spawn a dozen or 2 of chickens from the eggs, and you should be perfectly fine. As long as we have some passive creatures here to prevent new striders to spawn, you should be good. And that would be it, guys, for today. A straightforward but very effective way of obtaining large amounts of ghast tears and gunpowder, as well as ghast themselves if you need them for something. It'll take you some time to build this farm with its full size, and it might not even be your full size if you want to even more of it. If you like all the gunpowder, it's just easy to expand by adding more of these towers, but at least you shouldn't have any technical problems in building it. Little side note at the end, I know it's been over 2 months since my last video. Like many people, I took a few weeks around Christmas to just chillax, but even then it took me over 6 weeks to actually make this video. Life has been quite tough lately, like on anybody else. I hope you understand. I have a few things in the works for the channel, but it might be a little bit slower than usual to get them out. I still do value the quality over quantity approach in here, which you probably know, as well as bringing some extra values to the videos. Boy, the portal block duplication glitch I discovered? Pff, big brain, real treat. I hope you would appreciate that, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave me a like or leave me a comment in the comment section below. Subscribe if you are new to see more such things in the future, and see you in the next one. Bye bye!